what is it that from your perspective we can look as well, taking from here to make it as part of the actions that we will be discussing?
All right, it's on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me, and I think I'm quite honored that there's a seat at a table for us young people to just contribute to the discussion, some of the things that we are doing. So when I think about the topic, I mean, it's something that I do. I'm in agri. They always say, how do you make agri sexy and attractive for young people? It's technology. So we do both agri-tech. We have over 20,000 farmers on our platform, and we have over R1 billion worth of contracts on our platform. And I think one of the key things when you're thinking about financial inclusion, when you really go back to the stats of Africa, I mean, we've already spoken about the stats about how much we have the most arable land, 60% of the most arable land, 50% of food is being imported though. And when we look at the market in 2030, which is seen to be a $1 trillion market, how can we ensure that women are taking part in that market? And the biggest piece is finance, which is something that I do on a daily basis in terms of how do we bring up innovative ways of financing? How do we think about other alternative ways of financing women or financing farmers within the sector? And when you go back to what startups have done in Africa, you look at Flutterwave, they are valued at $3.2 billion US dollars. And I mean, already that's an African solution that came out in terms of payments. You look at M-Pesa, I mean, that in itself is one of the leading mechanisms in terms of mobile payments. So there's a lot of innovation that's taking place within the space, and that's taking place in Africa. And when you go back to agri, one of the issues that, I'm sitting with banks right now. I mean, ABSA is one of our minority shareholders, so I have to say really nice things. But there's a lot of things that happen when it comes to accessing credit, which is a driver for you to grow as a business, right? You need finance to grow. And one of the things I will say is that a lot of first-generation farmers are risky, or they're not bankable, or they just don't have enough collateral. Then this is where technology becomes important. How can technology play a factor in really creating alternative ways of looking at data to better finance or to de-risk farmers? And also technology stands as a key for to really eliminate traditional barriers, but also to be a low-cost, scalable, and data-driven decisions. So what we've done at Khula, we've actually built models around de-risking farmers. So one of the things that you'll find is that obviously credit, you want to access finance so that you can plant for the season, you need production inputs, so you can service contracts or even service any market. And so what we've done, we've taken all the data on our platform to essentially de-risk the farmer. You look at transactional data, that's how a farmer is buying or selling. You look at behavioral data, so that something that would have been a barrier for a farmer to access finance because they're seen as not bankable, now they have access to finance. We have a lot of women that are planting. I mean, one of the women that we have right now, we just helped to double her production. She's planting 200 hectares of maize, and now she's planting 400 hectares. And her break-even point, she only needs to achieve 2 tons per hectare to break even, but she's going to achieve 5.5 tons per hectare. Wow. I mean, already that shows you that there's potential in terms of how you can look at alternative ways of financing, building credit models, and also looking at how can we use technology from an, IoT perspective, where one of the fears banks have or traditional lenders is the default rate when it comes to emerging farmers or your first generation farmers. One of the things that we've done is we looked at data that's on ground. So what we've done is we've taken thousands of programs, we've taken thousands of soil tests so that we can predict basically the outcome of that specific land for that specific farmer, which ultimately leads to ways of de-risking that farmer. So when you look at default rates, you look at performance risk, we've already done that through technology. So innovation is so key in financial inclusion. We cannot speak about $1 trillion market in 2030, but we're not looking at alternative ways of financing, because that's how you'll get more women taking part in this, especially women or businesses that are seen as more riskier, inverted commas. And how can we do that? And we at Khula have done that through building models that really find ways that are sustainable. And not only that, how do we also ensure that there's on-the-ground support? Because one of the things you don't want to do is you give a farmer
Funds,
finance,
yes.
but there's no support on ground, you
Yeah.
know, and that's something that we are very heavy on. We have agronomists on ground that work very closely with the farmers. So there's so many stories that we can talk about that we've worked with farmers to access finance and what it's meant for their business, and also to ensure that we are part of that $1 trillion market in 2030.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things that I'm seeing as a golden thread from the conversation around policy is this notion of agribusiness. And I mean, you are talking about it, innovation from a financing perspective and using technology, but also from a production perspective. So perhaps this is one pillar that taking from here, we can also look at to say, how do we actually practicalize it, but also ensure that there is access to markets so that we can actually include more women for them to participate in that space. So I'll come to you then, Sis Njobe. So I know you've already given us a presentation. You talked about a key element of home loans, right? Most of the time as women, we think of owning a home as a start. But I'd like you to reflect a bit on how we can use that as an asset to generate further income, because I think that's a conversation that we hardly have. And it's lovely to see young people coming together as group to create these assets that are able to create a safety net so that even if I am not employed, but at least there is some form of stream of income. So if maybe you could reflect on that a bit and see how we can broaden that conversation to ensure that we include women.
Absolutely. And I'm going to use a reflection here, I guess having seen this for a couple of years. A lot of us, women included, actually don't know that there are so many propositions across the sector to enable home ownership. And I'll use an example from an ABSA perspective. We launched the buy-to-let. Buy-to-let is obviously for investors proposition. But in there, what we learned is that a lot of people struggle with affordability. They want to invest, but affordability is a big issue. And we said, let's partner. So we chose a partner that gave us data that actually allowed us to say, you can actually put in future rental income in your affordability assessment, right? So what that what they did, it suddenly unlocked the opportunity to own a property because of that. It's innovation again. You know, think about leveraging data. Future rental income is part of the affordability assessment, and I use that as one example. But I also think second to that, because not too many people know or ask, is there's so much info, and I love digital. I love the era we're in, because information is widely available across all banks. I say this, it's all available. Is how do we ensure that as we sit here and we talk to families and friends, encourage them to go and look at what's there. Because I'm giving you one example of many. There's even a lot for affordable housing, never mind the fact that we've even got first-time home finance from government as a subsidy. But the information is there.
Sure.
Right? But the other element is that we're afraid to ask. We don't ask, right? You approach your bank, and you ask, what is available for somebody who looks like me? And I say like me, profile, I don't have this. And the last one for me is that when you do have property, however small or whatever the case may be, ask the question, how can I leverage what I have? And we often talk about equity. When the value of your property goes up, you can use that component to do more. We also offer, because we understand that we need to be in spaces where consumers are. And hence we believe in partnerships. And I'll use one example, the South African Property Investor Network, which is on the ground. And we focus on conversations on the ground to address those questions. And through that partnership, we help answer those questions. So for me, I think if it's one thing that I'll leave behind, information is there. We're in a digital era. Never be afraid to ask, no matter what the question is. And the third one is we've got many partnerships where we're expanding our reach so we can serve better the consumers that are looking to grow their property portfolios.
Thank you so much, Ndumiso. So yourself and Ayanda have already triggered the next point that we'll start discussing when we craft that action plan. So I want people to be intentional about some of the questions they have. How do I tap into this opportunity? It's always scary when you start. But I mean, when you hear stories of people that have started, be it in agribusiness, like Ayanda has communicated and Nondumiso has talked about property, it's always taking the first step that actually ripples into other better opportunities. But maybe just touching on yourself, Ms. Tandiwe, I know there is a video that you wanted us to reflect on around education and how that plays a role in inclusion. So we won't be playing that video, but perhaps if you can give us that perspective from your end to some of the mentorships that you have done. And again, in the constraints of time, if you can just get straight to the point to say these are some of the elements that we can look at from that perspective if we are to drive inclusion.
So thanks for the opportunity. I mean, I'm a banker by profession, and I'll come back to that, I guess, in my closing comments, contributions here. But I'm here as a storyteller. And the story that we tell is a story of education as an equalizer. I was a beneficiary of a scholarship, and so were a number of other South African women, to study in the US and obtain their first degrees. They went on to do other things and are now based in the US and in South Africa, driving, a lot of them as captains of industry and doing really good things with their education and their lives. But I think the thing about it is, so what is the story? So the story is about these women and their journey. And we spoke earlier about where we come from. A lot of us come from rural areas. A lot of us come from townships. And being able to afforded the opportunity, almost when this luck and when preparation meets opportunity, and that translates into luck, but being afforded that opportunity to pursue something that then gives them that opportunity to get the education. But why was it important for us to tell the story? It was important because the story is set in a time that was really important in our history. So it was a time when around the world there was a lot of social activism that was driving change around apartheid. And that's important because I think people have made the point earlier about how coming together in your own way can activate a change that is very meaningful and very significant. So what we saw in US campuses was that students were starting to protest against where universities were investing their money, and they wanted the divestment out of South Africa. What universities then decided to do with that funding was to then allocate it to students from South Africa so that they could have an opportunity to get this education. So I think that's an important point around why this story was so important. But it's also a story of hope. It's a story of purpose. It's a story of friendship. It's a story of courage. It's a story of persistence. And it's also a story of understanding, being very intentional about going after an opportunity and almost saying, I'll figure out what the challenges are as I go along, but my intent is very clear about why I want to get this education, and I will figure things out as I go along. So it takes women from South Africa into the US and then follows their journey post their studies and where they are today. Yeah. The last thing I'll say is that it's also important, I think, for educational settings, because this story opens up a number of avenues for dialogue around different things, right? So we talk about the social activism that enabled the opportunity for people and what we can do in our own individual spaces to drive change. But it's also important because it opens up stories about women's positions in society and how women come in contact with opportunities, what women do with those opportunities, and then what obligations women take forward when they are in positions of leadership. What kind of decisions are they compelled to make around supporting and lifting other women as they rise? But in the context of financial services, which is where I said I'll come back to, it's about those decision points where we can start to influence not just product development in our institution that will support financial inclusion of women at a large scale, but also where we're deploying capital. So where the chairman spoke earlier about capital going into women-led funds, how much of it is going in that direction? Because women-led funds will invest in women businesses, and that will start to drive the type of change that we've been talking about. But also when we think about where do our CSI fund? Where does our CSI funding go? So what kind of programs are we targeting?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad Prof spoke earlier about telling stories, because as I was sitting here and thinking, I'm saying there's a number of ways that we can direct some of this funding that we have in corporate to tell stories, because I think stories are powerful in creating a visual for people.
Certainly,
They're powerful in inspiring people. They're powerful in connecting people to success and seeing that a journey that they are on is very similar to the journey of that person in the story. But also stories are scalable, so you can get the message out there. So when I think about the decisions we take in our corporate context, we do tend to we'll fund education programs, we'll fund different things, which are all very important, but are we funding opportunities to tell stories of success? Are we funding opportunities to share what models of financial inclusion could look like? And I think that's quite an important component of the things that we can do and how intentional we can be about the decisions that we make when we are in our boardrooms.
Thank you so much, Sisti. I just wanted to check if that video would be available. Can people get access to it just so that they can draw inspiration to it? It doesn't have to be played now, but also just to have people see the storytelling element and see the track record or the storyline of how somebody started just ordinary like everyone else, but also what it resulted in. Will that be available?
Yes, we'd love to make it available. There is a QR code, and I'm not sure if that can be shared on a screen outside. I'll talk to...
Yes, possibly we can allow for that.
There's a QR code which will take you to a landing page, which will just tell you about how to access the story. It'll tell you a little bit about the context of the story. And also what we'd really like to do in the essay contents is really start to partner with different organizations to share that story. We haven't had an opportunity to have an official screening in South Africa, so if there's any of you out there that would be interested in partnering us on that journey, we'd really welcome that opportunity, because that story is being told now in the United States. It needs to be told in South Africa and in other African countries. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Last 30 seconds. One word. You're in an elevator pitch. You're with Mambeki and you want to say something critical that you don't want it to be excluded from this conversation when we leave today. The most I can give is 3 words, and I'm going to start with yourself, Ayanda. You can just borrow the mic.
Okay. 30 seconds, shoo, that's so tough. But I think in closing, I think it's very important that we continue to push funding in innovation and agri. We spoke about the opportunities that are available right there, and I think for anyone that's moving in as a first-generation farmer, there's a lot of opportunities around market access, access to financing, how do I better do production inputs? That's something we do. But the main and the most important pillar is having sort of that sort of support in terms of channeling those partnerships that can actually drive that innovation, because a lot of these things are only possible the way they're happening at that scale because of innovation.
And then the elevator opens and you have lost Mambeki from that 30 seconds. Thank you so much for that input. Yourself, 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, I'd say thank you. These dialogues are very important. And let's remind ourselves of being in this room as we go out there and become a lot more intentional about what we do. And just an anecdote, Mambeki actually opened the door for me to get my first scholarship to the United States. And so the power of what can come from connecting the dot for one person is just incredible.
I think mine would be number 1 is partnerships. Partnerships. The second one is scale. Got to scale knowledge.
Yes.
Need to find a way to scale knowledge across the board. And the last one for me is around continuing to check and challenge.
Yes.
Check and challenge. I went through the 2024 booklet and I see some lovely recommendations, and we need to track what we do.
Thank you so much. To my panelists, pardon me, time constraints is not on our side, but we gave the elders a chance in the earlier panel. But thank you so much for your contributions. Please do form part of the dialogue whereby we continue to craft action plans, and let's see what we actually see materialize from these dialogues as well. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, ladies. Appreciate it.